Good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Good morning.
It is so good to be here with you all. I wanted to share with you today, to begin with, just one of my favorite quotes. And I'm going to share two versions of it. One I didn't even know existed. So Deepak Chopra said, "Healing is a return to memory of wholeness." That speaks so loudly to me. It reminds me to remember my truth. And when I'm in that memory, in that knowing, in that assuredness, I'm able to seek more clearly. I'm able to think more clearly. Recently, though, somebody asked me, because I shared that quote quite a bit, they said, "What's that quote you talk about?" And I went to look it up so I could send them just like a cute little picture of it. And there's so much more to it. So I'd like to share with you the full version of that quote. And it says, "The healing is the return to memory of wholeness. Healing, health, whole, and holy all mean inclusiveness. Body, mind, spirit, environment, relationships, social interactions are all one wholeness, and you're a part of that oneness." That took that beautiful quote and expanded it into, I don't know, all of Unity's teachings maybe? Doesn't that encompass everything we talk about? I mean, think about our Unity principles. God is good, everywhere present. We create our reality. We are all one with God. So that simple little quote for me was really powerful because it allowed me to remember for others as well. And the truth is we can't do the work for others, but we can remind them. There's a beautiful song, and I'm forgetting his last name, Carlos somebody. I know I told you about it, but I can't remember his name still, but it's called "I Cause You to Remember." So I'm hoping to be able to do a little bit of that here today, to cause you to remember. And I feel like, especially through COVID, but really just in our daily lives, it's really easy to forget. Have you noticed? We teach that God is within everyone. The Christ presence is with everyone. And then we go out into the world and we use our physical senses and we look and we're like, "Oh, I don't know, maybe not that one. I don't see the presence in that one." But it's not ours to necessarily understand or recognize in others. It's ours simply to know that it exists. One of the things I do in volunteer world is I am a volunteer cuddler at a hospital in Pontiac, and I cuddle babies born addicted. And the cuddling is actual physical therapy for them. And I'm pretty sure it's physical and mental and emotional therapy for me too, but that's not the point. And it's interesting because here's this baby that started off life in a rough way. Neonatal abstinence syndrome is basically the withdrawals they're going through. And yet when I cuddle those babies, all I see is complete wholeness. No judgment, no even thoughts about what could go wrong, but I see pure love, pure peace. I see the face of God. Wouldn't it be amazing if we saw that in everyone? Now that would probably require limited circles of people were around and never turning on the news. But again, if we can just know it. So I wanted to look at that word wholeness a little bit more. So I opened up the Revealing Word, and I like to see, where Charles Fillmore came from with some of these thoughts. So I'd like to share the metaphysical meaning of wholeness, because that's quite a word. If we're dealing with even just a cold, much less a serious disease, we don't feel real whole. If we've lost somebody we love, or we're going through some sort of loss of a different sort, a loss of a job, a loss of a marriage, we often don't feel whole. And yet we always are. We just forget in this human experience. So wholeness, it says in the Revealing Word, is the perfect unification and expression of man as spirit, soul, and body. True healing means to make whole, and it's brought about by regeneration. So I had to look up that word. It's like regeneration. We talk about that a lot in Unity, but what is it? And this is where I really, it took my breath away because we talk about this in so many ways. Regeneration in the Revealing Word also is a change in which abundant spiritual life, even eternal life, is incorporated into the body. the transformation that takes place through bringing all the forces of mind and body to the support of the Christ ideal. The unification of spirit, soul, and body in spiritual oneness. That's a lot of words, though. And Charles could be really wordy. I love Charles Fillmore, but I feel like he often writes as he thinks it out. So in the truthunity.net, great resource if you're ever looking to dive a little bit deeper. And often in the study Bible, they will give you a little bit more. And here's a quote by Ed Rabel about regeneration. Excuse me. It says, regeneration begins its work in the conscious mind and completes it in the subconscious. And that's where I think our job begins, just in our thoughts. It all begins in our thoughts. You know, there's some people, and many days I'm one of them, that's like, snow. And yet, every year, people are like, you could move. I mean, you live in Michigan. It's like, oh, true. Or I could shift my thinking. And just recently, when we had that big snowfall a couple weeks ago, or it was supposed to be big, it wasn't really as bad as they said. But I looked out and I thought, I have to admit, it's kind of pretty. And then I'm like, what would make it even better if I had one of those little snow mold things to make the shapes? And I said that, and somebody sent them to me anonymously by Amazon. I received a package the next day with little duckies and hearts and little molds. And so immediately, the one that doesn't care for the cold or the snow ran outside without my gloves, without my coat, and started making little snow duckies. Shift in thinking, right? All of a sudden, I found something that amused me, that made it fun, that made it exciting. And then I started envisioning little snow duckies all over town. So if I have your address, don't be surprised. I'm kind of that person. But think about the places where you struggle the most, where you resist the most. Where are you really, truly resisting? It's just in our minds. It's all in the way we think. So today, I wanted to look at how we can shift that. How can we return to that memory of wholeness? Before the holidays, I should say I'm on the board of directors for Unity on Campus, which is a ministry out of Ann Arbor for the college kids. And Reverend Ernestine Griffin has been running it for a long time. And we've been looking at ways to shift it since COVID, because the truth is not everybody's going to return in person. Some people are going to stay Zoom, where we love you and love to have you. And I love it too, when I don't have to go out and drive in the snow. It's great to do from home. But we've been looking for different ways. So all of a sudden I get a text from her that says, you just had a package delivered. Let me know which chapter you're presenting. I had no idea what she was talking about. But I go to my porch, and here is this book. 1 + 1 is 1. I had just been sent homework. And so there was my resistance. Well, I wasn't even asked. That's not the role of a director, board of directors. And I really didn't have a problem with it. But I'm like, I haven't been given homework in quite a while. And yet, my conversation with so many people had been about, in my view, the things going on in the world over the past few years and all the resistance we've had to each other has been because we've forgotten one another. We've simply forgotten. You can knock into somebody at the grocery store and literally not know if it was a man or woman, because we're also in our own little world. We're caught up in the doing. And we forget. We don't notice. We can talk to somebody and not realize maybe they were in crisis mode, and we all put on a happy face. How are you doing? How are you? I'm good. Everything's fine. And yet, sometimes when we're really present, we can notice that maybe there's more to that story than even the words that were spoken. But we have to remember. So as I was going through this book, it was interesting because I'm like, everything I've been having conversations with people about is right here. And somehow, I was just assigned this as my homework. By accident? Probably not. Have you noticed that what you need shows up in all kinds of different forms when you ask for it, even if you didn't really mean to ask for it? Just beautiful. So, in metaphysics, in Unity, we teach the mind idea expression. But we also learn that it's all in our control. we can change our thinking. One of the things for me that helps is if I'm feeling funky in some sort, whether I'm maybe a little annoyed with people, if that happened to anybody but me, just humans, some days you're like, I might need a timeout. Or maybe you're sad or your mind is frazzled in some way. Whenever that happens to me, I usually feel it first. And if I simply check in and see what I'm thinking about, it makes sense. And often, it's not necessarily what I'm in the process of doing. Something may have triggered me or caused a thought, and I'm now either in the past thinking about something that may not have gone the way I wanted, or I'm worrying about something, which is being in the future. And we're great storytellers, aren't we? When we're worrying, we're usually thinking something like this when the possibility is really something like this. It's just normal. I don't know a way to stop it. You know, my favorite service of the year, I think, is the burning bowl. And I love that combined with the white stone. But it's really dawned on me the last couple of years that when we burn the paper, when we write these things down and release them, they're still with us. It seems they don't magically disappear. So for me, I've worked on learning different ways to transform it instead. If this is something I want to let go of, how can I transform it? How can I change my perspective? How can I look at it a different way? And that has proven to be far more beneficial to me than thinking I can just let go of that which has been with me for however long, sometimes years or decades even. You ever notice there's certain things we write down or we even set goals for every year after year after year? But if we had let it go truly, we wouldn't have to repeat it, right? So the transformation process can allow us just to dance with it a little different, to think of it a little different. So I'd like to share with you a quote out of the book that really shines some light on a lot of this for me. It says, let us review Jesus' prayer found in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, 22 through 23. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may become completely one. If we take this to heart, there is no way for you not to be an offspring of God, but you can forget. A key factor in the power of prayer has to do with where and with what we identify. Now that ties into some different teachings of classes I've been taking lately where we've been talking about our identity. And if we identify as somebody who gets riled up real easily, that's just who I am. And we all have different things we say that about, right? That's just who I am. I've always been that way. That's our not only our story that we're telling ourselves, but it's how we identify ourselves. Sometimes we identify ourselves with the hats that we wear. I am a nurse, a mom, a whatever it is. But then, if you lose one of those things, you're not sure who you are. You've forgotten the real truth that those are actions you take or roles you play. But the real truth of you is the spiritual truth. I'm a volunteer in hospice. I do Reiki with hospice patients, and the activity that we use for training, one of them, was so powerful. They gave us 4 stacks of little hearts, 4 of each color. And the first color, we had to write the 4 most important people in our life. The next 4 were the 4 most important things. Things weren't just like your car and your house. They included your pets, which confuses me a little because I think they should be in the people part, but wherever you put them. And then the 4 most important places and the 4 most important roles, which would be like parent or your job or minister or whatever it is. And then they ask you to give away, you have to give up 1 of each color. Now they're just little pieces of construction paper, and yet it dove right down into emotions for everybody involved. So now you're bargaining. All right, if I had to give up 1. Well, it was hard enough to come up with who are the 4 most important people. Now you got to sacrifice 1. It's like, okay, and you're able to do that, like, don't want to, but if I had to, all right. not an activity you want your kids to see. In case you have 4, then they're going to see who you give up first. But then someone came by and grabbed one out of each pile without giving us a choice. And here I'm like, there's one part of my mind going, it's just construction paper. Take a breath. And yet you're like, that might not have been the one I'd choose. Then we had to turn them all over so we couldn't see what we wrote on them and slide away one more out of each, not knowing what we are giving up, leaving us with just one of each. And of course the lesson was to help us understand what people in hospice are going through, because often the parent now becomes the child, or they've had to give up their pets or their home and so forth. But it really was a great lesson in all areas for me. And it caused me to remember that those aren't who I am. Even if it's something tragic like losing a child. Yesterday I was in a memorial service for my nephew-in-law who passed, and there's nothing more heartbreaking than a parent losing a child. It seems out of order. But even that, you're still the parent. They'll never be separate from them. They'll always be a part of you. But it's so hard to remember in those moments. But even if you lose a job, if you identified as this is who you've been and what you've been doing all this time, then who are you without it? I had that thought when my kids turned 18 and 21 in the same year. All of a sudden I had to figure out who I was without them. But I'm not without them. I'm just not technically responsible for them anymore. They don't always know that, I think. But it's just an interesting space when we forget all the stories we make up, and the way our thinking can cause us to feel like close to nothing when we are still that perfect child that I mentioned cuddling, that pure love, that pure joy in the world, expressing God. God is expressing in and through and as each and every one of us, even the ones that don't do it in the way that we can identify. So I'd like to share another quote with you out of this book. And really, when we think about oneness, it helps to remember what I do to me, I do to God. What I do to others, I'm doing to God. And when we think about that in that way, at least for me, it helps me be a little bit more mindful, a little bit more present with my words, with my thoughts, with my actions. But when we forget, it's real easy to be that person that just knocked someone over in the grocery store and didn't even look back to see who it was, right? We all have those moments. We all try to do our best, but that can change. Even if we have a cold, like I said, the smallest thing, we're not in our best state of mind in those moments, or if we're distracted, if we're rushing, if we're worried. So Jesus' teachings made it clear that most importantly, we are to love God, which in essence means we are to have an all-out love for love itself, which God is. Jesus said that like unto it is the love of our neighbor as ourself. Why? Because within the principle of 1 + 1 is 1, our neighbor is ourself. Inside this principle's one life is no longer just about me, but we. How do we go from me to we? We are in this life together. We are one. We are spiritual beings. We are eternal souls. For me, I often think, wouldn't it be great if we could return to a tribal mentality? You know, when I was little, and I don't know if anybody else can relate to this, but if I was doing something wrong down the street, the neighbors handled it, and they had permission to handle it however they saw fit, right? Where now, don't even look at somebody else's kid the wrong way. And there's highs and lows to all of it. But I thought, what a beautiful thing, because it wasn't just when we were acting up and needing to be disciplined, really. It was so much more than that. It was if somebody else's child fell, the neighbor, the mom down the street bandaged their knee, gave them a hug if they needed it. If there was a family that was hungry, neighbors chipped in, not just after a funeral. We've just forgotten ourselves, forgotten each other. And so to return to that memory of wholeness, sometimes it's little things like reading books or being community like this, even online, just to connect with like minds. But also just looking at how are you supposed to show up in the world? What is yours to do? Maybe spreading little snow duckies around. And yet, it's funny because something so silly and so small, you guys haven't even seen them, and yet I saw a lot of smiles. My neighbor stopped to see them when I wasn't even home because I put them on my porch. And she's a very serious person, and yet she saw me out there, was curious, and came out. And I'm like, oh, try the heart one. And she rolled her eyes and shook her head and continued to make little hearts. Even the most serious. And that seems so simple, but it doesn't always take grand gestures. It doesn't always take being able to open an orphanage or even volunteer in certain roles, which, don't get me wrong, I personally love that. I do a lot of volunteering. I really enjoy it. Sometimes it simply takes believing for each other. We can believe more for each other than we can often believe for ourselves. That's one of the gifts of the prayer partners, is somebody else is holding that. It's kind of like if you just speak it out loud, send it into silent unity, you don't even have to speak it, you can suddenly allow a little bit of that to be taken out of the backpack we all carry around. And know that somebody else is helping you hold it. It's in somebody else's hands. Because the truth is, God is everywhere present, right? That's what we teach. And I think we forget that too. You know, we don't necessarily believe God's up there on a cloud, and yet in our worst moments, isn't that who we're praying to? But if God is everywhere present, God is out there, not just in here, moving in and through and as other people. Maybe the medical staff. Maybe the neighbor. And so when we resist that, because us helper types aren't great at receiving help, have you noticed? Anybody can relate to that? Who doesn't ask for help when they need it? And yet, when we're of help or of service, that's where we remember our oneness. So maybe we can allow others to have that same experience. Just by asking for help or offering help or checking in. Not waiting for people to say, I need help, but maybe if somebody's quiet or you haven't seen the neighbor out in a while, just checking in on them. How you doing? Want to come out and play? Or I have some extra muffins that I made. Can I interest you? Those little things help others to remember that they're not alone, that we really are all connected. And although everybody isn't meant to be in our sandbox, there's going to be people that we struggle with. If we just know that that's within them too, that Christ present is really truly within everyone, just that belief makes a shift in the world. That we are not so separate. But sometimes it requires us closing our eyes and remembering from here. There's this great meditation that I share often when I do Reiki that I'd like to share with you. It's called a Tao meditation. And it says, close your eyes and you will see clearly. Cease to listen and you will hear truth. Be silent and your heart will sing. Seek no contacts and you will find union. Be still and you will move forward on the tide of the Spirit. Be gentle and you will need no strength. Be patient and you will achieve all things. Be humble and you will remain entire. When we're struggling with our outer senses, go within. Because that's the place where it's so much easier to see the oneness in all that is. So I'd like to leave you with one last quote out of this book. And it is actually a letter. It said it was written by Albert Einstein. So this is, apparently there was a bunch of letters that he used to write to his daughter Lisserl. And sometime after his passing, he submitted these, and this one is one of them. It says, Dear Lisserl, when I proposed the theory of relativity, very few understood me. And what I will reveal now to transmit to mankind will also collide with the misunderstanding and prejudice in the world. I ask you to guard the letters as long as necessary, years, decades, until society is advanced enough to accept what I will explain below. There is an extremely powerful force that, so far, science has not found a formal explanation to. It is a force that includes and governs all others, and is even behind any phenomenon operating in the universe, and has not yet been identified by us. This universal force is love. When scientists looked for a unified theory of the universe, they forgot the most powerful unseen force. Love is light that enlightens those who give and receive it. Love is gravity because it makes some people feel attracted to others. Love is power because it multiplies the best we have and allows humanity not to be extinguished in their blind selfishness. Love unfolds and reveals. For love we live and die. Love is God, and God is love. This force explains everything and gives meaning to life. This is the variable that we have ignored for too long. Maybe because we are afraid of love, because it is the only energy in the universe that man has not learned to drive at will. To give visibility to love, I made a simple substitution in my most famous equation. Instead of E equals mc squared, we accept that the energy to heal the world can be obtained through love multiplied by the speed of light squared. We arrive at the conclusion that love is the most powerful force there is because it has no limits. After the failure of humanity in the use and control of the other forces of the universe that have turned against us, it is urgent that we nourish ourselves with another kind of energy. If we want our species to survive, if we are to find meaning in life, if we want to save the world and every sentient being that inhabits it, love is the one and only answer. Perhaps we are not yet ready to make a bomb of love, a device powerful enough to entirely destroy the hate, selfishness, and greed that devastate the planet. However, each individual carries within them a small but powerful generator of love whose energy is waiting to be released. When we learn to give and receive this universal energy, dear Lisserl, we will have affirmed that love conquers all, is able to transcend everything and anything, because love is the quintessence of life. I deeply regret not having been able to express what is in my heart, which has quietly beaten for you all my life. Maybe it's too late to apologize, but as time is relative, I need to tell you that I love you, and thanks to you, I have reached the ultimate answer. Your father, Albert Einstein. Right. Imagine just holding that truth and that knowing in our hearts. So I invite you to take that truth, just that concept. You know, the size of a mustard seed is all the faith we need. I propose the faith in love, the knowing, just this much, even when we can't see it outside, to turn within and feel it here. And ask what is yours to do and how is yours to show up, and then take it out into the world. I believe it's next week, beginning on Monday, I believe, is Random Acts of Kindness Week. So there's a fun way to be creative and see how you might spread a little more of that love than we maybe do normally. So with that, just take a deep breath. Take just a moment to put your hands on your heart and just apply a little bit of pressure there, because they say that that releases the same hormones as a real hug. If we start by loving ourselves, it'll be so much easier to love others.